The closing bell is rung, but the business story continues. I'm Robert Tanyer watching Business Brief. Let's get started. A boost in oil production expected from the United Arab Emirates as it exits OPEC and OPEC+. The House Justice Committee votes not to open the box containing Vice President Sara Duterte's tax records. And the World Bank warns of a 24% spike in energy prices this year. More oil production is expected from the United Arab Emirates after it announced its withdrawal from OPEC and OPEC+. The details from Joel Caballero.
The United Arab Emirates will withdraw from the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, as well as the wider OPEC Plus alliance, effective May 1st. UAE's Minister of Energy and Infrastructure said this will enable them to operate with more flexibility. Analyst George Leon believes the UAE can now increase oil production and help bring down fuel prices. OPEC was founded in September 1960 in Iraq. Its objective was to coordinate and unify petroleum policies and prices of member countries to ensure stability in the international oil market.
I think at the moment what we're seeing in the Middle East is a very important geopolitical developments. I think we see two clearly differentiated groups. On the one hand, we have Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Egypt, and Turkey, which are forcing themselves as the energy the security leaders in the region. And on the other hand, as you correctly mentioned, you have the UAE, which is with close links with India, Israel, and the US. And I think that what this really means for oil markets is that we're likely to see much more production from the UAE coming forward, and that would mean lower oil prices in the medium and long term.
Leon also believes oil demand will gradually decrease in the long term.
If we now enter in a period where oil demand starts growing less and less, and at some point starts peaking and decreasing, then game theory will tell you that cohesion is at risk within OPEC and OPEC+. Now, the important element here is that we know that oil demand is going to peak sometime soon, and at some point in the 30s or in the 40s, depending on the forecast that you look, oil demand will start decreasing rapidly as we electrify transportation and we increase our efficiency. Now, the important consideration there is there a role for OPEC or OPEC Plus in a world where oil demand is rapidly decreasing?
Before the UAE announced its withdrawal, OPEC member states accounted for about 36% of global oil production and controlled roughly 80% of the world's proven oil reserves. Joel Caballero, Bilyonaryo News Channel.
The alliance of the U.S. and the United Kingdom remains strong despite disagreements in some issues. This was the message conveyed by King Charles during his speech at the U.S. Congress. U.S. President Donald Trump previously criticized U.K. Prime Minister Keir Starmer for what Trump says is his lack of help in the Iran war. In his address, the king called for unity in defending Ukraine against Russian invaders, but a similar call to address the Middle East conflict was not made.
In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, when NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time, and the United Nations Security Council was united in the face of terror, we answered the call together, as our people have done so for more than a century, shoulder to shoulder, through 2 world wars, the Cold War, Afghanistan, and moments that have defined our shared security. Today, Mr. Speaker, that same unyielding resolve is needed for the defense of Ukraine and her most courageous people.
U.S. President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania hosted a state dinner for King Charles and Queen Camilla at the White House on Tuesday. Trump said both he and King Charles agree that Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. The king, for his part, praised Trump's Secret Service for their quick action on Saturday during a shooting incident at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
countries have stood together, defiant and triumphant against the forces of communism, fascism, and tyranny. Together we have expanded the reaches of human knowledge and endeavored always to make this world safer, more prosperous, more just, and more free. Ours is a treasured friendship, an eternal bond, and a true story of extraordinary heroism and skill. A lot of skill, tremendous skill.
An analyst is projecting that the Philippine peso may weaken further toward the 62 level. On BNC's Business 360, Rona Cova, chief investment strategist at Trading Edge Consultancy, said a combination of fundamental and macroeconomic factors continues to weigh on the peso's momentum. He added that the currency's downward pressure could, in theory, be curbed through a rate hike from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas.
Because increasing interest rates would somewhat entice flows back to the Philippines, but apparently it's not. Apparently it's not enough. So it's really more of an external factors easing. For example, crude tempering down from its current level of 103, perhaps the 90s, would somewhat alleviate some downward pressure on the peso.
As of 1:51 this afternoon, the peso hit a fresh all-time low of 61.62 compared to the previous close of 61.30. Members of the House Committee on Justice may vote today on the determination of probable cause regarding the complaints filed against Vice President Sara Duterte in her impeachment case. Kumuha tayo ng detalye kay Isaiah Mirafuentes ng Abante. Go ahead, Isaiah.
Yes, Robert, hindi nga binuksan ng House Committee on Justice ang sealed box na naglalaman ng tax records ni Vice President Sara Duterte. Yan ay dahil tinutulan ito ng mayorya ng komite. Sa botong 38 no, 6 yes at 0 abstain, hindi na tinuloy pang buksan ang kahon na naglalaman ng tax records ni VP Sara sa pagdinig ngayong araw kaugnay sa impeachment. Ayon sa mga mambabatas na tutol na buksan ito, mas mabuti nang maging sigurado sa proseso kaysa magkamali ang komite na makaapekto sa kahihinatnan ng impeachment. Tinatalakay na rin ang records ng National Bureau of Investigation kaugnay sa pagbabanta ng bise sa buhay ng first couple at former House Speaker Martin Romualdez. Ayon sa NBI, sa kanilang investigasyon, 3 counts of grave threats and 1 count of inciting to sedition ang naging paglabag ng ikalawang Pangulo. Samantala, wala pa rin ang bise sa posibleng huli ng pagdinig ng House Committee on Justice kaugnay sa impeachment. Robert, ngayon nga lang, katatapos lang ng National Bureau of Investigation at nakita na rin nating lumabas dito sa House of Representatives si NBI Director Melvin Matibag. At ngayon nga, Robert, kasalukuyan ang tinatalakay ng mga miyembro ng komite kung dapat na ba silang magbotohan ng determination of probable cause ngayong araw. May ilan sa mga mambabatas ang narinig natin na tumututol at gusto nga nilang bigyan pa ng isang araw si Vice President Sara Duterte na magpakita at tsaka doon ituloy ang magiging botohan. Pero naririnig din natin na may ilang mga mambabatas na tinututulan nga ito, maging nga si Congresswoman Jervel Luisres, ang chairman ng House Committee on Justice. Naniniwala siya na marami ng pagkakataon si VP Sara na dumalo, ngunit hindi pa rin siya nagpapakita. At ayon niya sa detalye rin na nakuha rin ng komite ng Kamara, kasalukuyan na nasa Laguna si VP Sara. So they're expecting, Robert, na hindi na talaga darating ang bise ngayong pagdinig. So yun ang aabangan natin, Robert, kung magbobotohan na ba ang House Justice Committee kaugnay sa probable cause, dahil kung magkagayon nga at manalo ang botong pabor sa impeachment ay magkakaroon ulit sila ng hearing para gumawa ng report at matapos nito ay isusumitin na nila ang kanilang committee report sa plenaryo ng Kamara. Robert.
Thank you for that report, Isaiah Mirafuentes. Meanwhile, senators are looking to ways to reduce electricity bills as many complain of the so-called bill shock. Let's get the details from Hannah T. She joins us live at the Senate. Hannah, what's the latest?
Robert, the removal of value-added tax on electricity was floated in today's Senate Protect Committee hearing as a way to help reduce power costs. This is after the issue on over electricity bills, which is gaining attention currently after some consumers flagged charges linked to Lifeline and senior citizen discounts. The Lifeline subsidy provided under the EPIRA, or Electric Power Industry Reform Act of 2001, is a socialized scheme meant to support low-income households. In practice, other consumers pay a small additional charge to help fund the discount. Currently, Robert, that cost is about 1 centavo per kilowatt hour, with the total program reaching around 8 billion pesos, according to the Energy Regulatory Commission. Only about 135,000 households, mostly beneficiaries of the 4Ps program, are covered. In line with the Lifeline subsidy, Senator Bam Aquino is pushing to review the system, saying the burden should be shouldered by the government, not passed on to other consumers, including the middle class. He's filed a resolution urging the Senate to revisit the design, targeting, and funding of the subsidy amid growing cost pressures on households. Separately, Senator Amy Marcos raised complaints from consumers claiming their electricity bills tripled despite no change in usage. The ERC has not directly validated those claims, but explained that higher bills are driven mainly by rising generation costs or the cost of producing electricity. The ERC said when generation costs or ancillary services increase, transmission charges also go up. Meralco, for its part, said the weakening peso has been driving up generation costs. Transmission charges are also affected by ancillary services or reserve power sources used to stabilize the grid, which are managed by the National Grid Corporation. Meralco added it's not in a position to fully explain ancillary cost computations since these are outside its direct control. Marcos later criticized what she described as layered charges, saying costs from generation, system loss, and ancillary services appear to be stacking up on consumers. Back to you, Robert.
Thank you for that report, Hannah T. The Bureau of Internal Revenue has ordered a tax audit of Vice President Sara Duterte and her husband Manasseh Manscarpio. The order also includes 9 businesses being linked to the couple. The BIR said it had issued letters of authority for the audit based on third-party information and data from official sources. These include testimonies from the Office of the Ombudsman and the Anti-Money Laundering Council during the House impeachment proceedings against the Vice President. Energy prices could rise by as much as 24% this year, potentially reaching their highest level since the Russia-Ukraine conflict in 2022. This is according to the World Bank amid the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Commodity prices are also expected to increase by nearly 20%. In its latest commodity markets outlook, the World Bank said attacks on energy infrastructure and shipping disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz have triggered what it calls one of the largest oil supply shocks on record. U.S. and ASEAN businesses tackle challenges posed by the Middle East crisis and other issues. Che Sulit joins us on the line for the details. Che, go ahead.
Yes, Robert. The U.S. ASEAN Business Council, in partnership with the ASEAN Business Advisory Council Philippines, launches its strategic action plan supporting the Philippines' chairship this year. Based on 5 high-level roundtable discussions, the plan brings together key recommendations from government leaders, industry experts, and private sector groups. The discussions focused on 5 major areas: sustainability and food security, healthcare, supply chains and logistics, digital economy and workforce development, and artificial intelligence. The initiative comes at a critical time for ASEAN as the region faces challenges in energy security, trade resilience, and digital transformation. In a video message, President Bongbong Marcos commended the leadership in advancing the Strategic Action Plan initiative. Marcos said that the roadmap reflects open dialogue, cooperation, and shared progress. Trade Secretary Cristina Roque also welcomes the Strategic Action Plan. She says that the policy recommendations of the Council align with the country's economic reality. Roque also stresses the importance of public-private collaboration, helping local industries grow further. President and CEO of the ASEAN Business Advisory Council Philippines, former Ambassador Brian McPeter, says that the initiative is focused on a long-term approach to strengthen ASEAN countries and address key regional challenges. And the Department of Foreign Affairs encourages free trade agreements with other countries. DFA Undersecretary Maria Angelita Austria says Lower trade barriers help countries diversify markets, especially at a time when global markets are under pressure. From the private sector, Robert, Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry Chairman George Barcelon says infrastructure must be a top priority. He highlights the need to improve roads and logistics systems to reduce costly delays and detours. Barcelon also stresses the importance of better flood control to support business operations. The Advisory Council says the plan will be more inclusive, with a stronger focus on supporting micro, small, and medium enterprises as part of ASEAN's long-term growth strategy. That's the latest from my end. Back to you, Robert.
Thank you for that report, Ches Sulit. We'll take a short break. This is Business Brief. The headlines are loud, oil inflation, the peso, but beneath all that noise, something deeper may already be shifting. The question now is no longer just what's happening, but what's changing and what it means for Filipinos moving forward. And joining us this afternoon is Christina Ulang, financial analyst and market strategist. Good afternoon, Christina. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Good afternoon, Sir Robert.
Christine,
Great to be here.
Great to have you here, Christina. Now, Christina, are we misreading this moment by focusing too much on prices and not enough on how behavior across the economy is already changing?
Well, the two goes together. They go together, price and the price signaling and then the consumption pattern, because consumers really react to price. And if we are saying inflation, like this year, inflation is projected at 6.3% according to the BSP, and HSBC is projecting something like 8%. So consumers are going to be a lot more price sensitive. They're going to delay their purchases of big items, discretionary, and they're going to focus really on the very essential. There's going to be belt tightening. There's going to be trading down in terms of the labels of the goods that they buy, the groceries, the apparels that they buy. There's not going to be any brand loyalty now, except for the rich, of course. But there's going to be a lot of substitution from more expensive to cheaper. And of course, business also is going to behave differently. So there's going to be differences in behavior. It's an entirely new world because we're operating in a high inflation environment. And look at the policy response of the BSP. Interest rates are rising. And so the cost of credit is also going to rise, and your lifestyle is also going to change. If you are too reliant on credit card, on borrowing left and right, so you will have to restrain your appetite for credit. So people are going to be like changing their lifestyle, restraining their appetite for luxury and for all the nice things of the world. Sorry to say.
Pause muna. Yeah. But with all these changes that's happening right now, not only behavioral changes, but what's happening around us in the economy, what's already quietly deteriorating in the economy that hasn't really shown up in the data yet?
Well, there are fears. Of course, the Middle East war is ongoing. It's unresolved. There is no peace deal. And really, what the question is what's happening to our OFW remittances. And the OFWs, what's going to happen to them? Their fate is in suspension, suspended animation. And OFW remittances, we don't know the quantum of how much is going to be the reduction. The DepDev, Secretary Balisacan, was saying we won't even reach like 100,000 repatriation because during the Iraq War, only 30,000 people were repatriated. So what's going to be the impact on unemployment, on our remittance? So these are all being assessed by government. The policy response is geared towards reducing the impact of all of this. But in the meantime, on the other side, it's the economy that's going to suffer. And we will have maybe more joblessness because of the repatriation of the OFW. And there is always a spillover effect. of that repatriation and the reduced remittance on the local economy in terms also of higher unemployment. So we're going to be hit by a double whammy, higher inflation. So the key risk now is the tendency of the economy to move from growth to slow growth and to even stagflation. And stagflation is something that's defined by very low growth, maybe 2%, below our historical 6%, way below 4%, and then high unemployment of 6% and above 6%. This is not yet registered in the asset markets. But one thing that's being registered in the FX market is really the weight of the oil import bill, which is going to rise.
So what needs to change? What do we need to do, Christina? We've seen now the peso breaching the 61 peso mark. And we've also seen the UAE exiting OPEC and OPEC plus. What do these mean? And how much of an effect will that have in our economy and here back in the Philippines?
Well, these are external forces. We really don't have any control over a peace deal that's going to happen, the ceasefire, whether it will break down, whether there's going to be a resumption of military hostilities. We don't know that. And so what's going to happen really is that the peso will continue to be dragged by negative sentiment and by this shift towards other safe havens, no longer emerging markets. So the confidence is being eroded in terms of investors' preference for emerging markets. Philippines is part of emerging markets. We're small, and there's now going to be a preference by investors into the larger markets, those that have AI stories, defense spending stories like the US, Taiwan, South Korea. They all have AI. We don't have that, and we're suffering from high inflation and a potentially higher import bill and a current account deficit that's going to be like somewhere like the IMF is predicting like negative 4.4% of GDP, coming from like 3.3% of GDP last year. So these are all weighing on the currency. What the policy can do really is to proactively temper inflation, proactively raise interest rates so that inflation expectations are tempered and are not de-anchored. So I think that's the very least that the monetary authorities can do over the currency, and then maybe intervene in the FX rate so that the volatility is not so much. So it's really it's a volatility game, and policy is really going to be geared towards reducing the volatility in markets. But so far, we're not seeing that much in the fixed income and in the PSA. Both are still very resilient.
But is the bigger risk now no longer inflation itself, but how people, the government, and how businesses react to it?
Yeah, it could be a self-fulfilling prophecy because during times of inflation, people and consumers do not spend much, and the question is what will happen to the revenues and top-line sales of businesses. The businesses will also have to adjust, and they may be starting to restructure their employment, their manpower, so that could mean lower jobs, lower job creation. They may be also postponing their expansion, reducing loans and leverage, so that's going to be negative for the banking industry. They may also be tightening the supply chain management, so the suppliers and the vendors in the overall supply chains are going to be suffering also because they're supplying the equipment, the materials, the raw materials, the intermediate to the factory or to the user. And what's going to happen if the customers reduce their consumption, their production? It is a domino effect. And the important thing really now is for policy, fiscal stimulus, and for the BSP to really work out a plan to really cushion the economy. I think that's the least that can be done now because these are all external forces. Cushion the economy by providing fiscally responsible cushion, stimulus to the economy, and then the BSP, of course, proactively looking after the banks, financial stability, and liquidity within the system. I think that's the least we can do now because these are all externally driven problems.
Christina, do you see the peso continue to weaken, let's say in the next few weeks? Even before the peso broke the 60 peso mark, There several economists and analysts were saying it could go to 62, 63, 65. What are your forecasts on this? How do you see this panning out in the next coming weeks?
Well, markets react to risk and to news. And this is not sometimes this is not so much fundamentally driven, but driven by just the news of higher inflation, higher oil prices. But once the ceasefire and once a peace deal is completed in this US-Iran war, there is going to be a big reset for the currency because the risk has reduced, which is now the driving force. It's fear. It's the fear premium that is now driving the FX market. It's not so much fundamentals and all of the news that we're hearing. And I think this is going to blow over eventually if Trump and Iran are able to come up with a deal. We will see easily a correction, a steep correction back to 60 and maybe even lower than 60. But if the military hostilities resumes and the situation in the Middle East deteriorates, then we are vulnerable, very vulnerable. So it's going to be swinging. This is going to make the peso really very volatile.
At what point does managing costs turn into real restructuring? And are we closer to that tipping point than businesses admit?
Well, the risk that is needed to be avoided is really the push towards stagflation, because that is really what the central bank and the government must manage. The economy moving into a very slow path, growth path, and then very low unemployment and loss of jobs, and then reduced purchasing power for the currency, declining purchasing power for the currency, and then stagnation of wages. So all of these four factors must be managed very well by the government policymakers. And I think the important thing now really is to ensure that we have adequate supply. So it all boils down to the adequacy of all the needed inputs like your oil, diesel, and then fertilizer, which are needed for our food security and energy sufficiency. So these are the two critical things we must ensure. And of course, protection for the vulnerable in terms of the ayuda and financial aid.
But having said that, Christina, so what can be done? A lot are saying that these are outside forces, some things that we didn't see coming, these are out of our control. What is in our control that we can do to help mitigate all these?
Well, as an individual and as a consumer, you have to start with a new mindset. So this is the beginning of an entirely new era of high inflation, and we must change our behavior in terms of our savings, in terms of our income opportunities. So I think people are going to be looking for income, more income, and in terms of investments, there are outlets for us to be able to take advantage of the high yield now of the fixed income market, and then invest in some uncorrelated assets in the stock market. You might want to choose all of these high dividend paying stocks, and then go more into corporate bonds. And then for the institutional investors, the sophisticated ones, they can go into TIPS, treasury treasury protected securities. They may want to go into venture capital, want to go into private equity, and then mutual fund, ETFs, gold. So and diversify also in terms not only of assets but also of your asset managers. You must have several advisors, and also you must have exposure, multi-asset investments, various geography. So I think that's the only way to reduce your risk and then manage the volatility of the portfolio and maximize return, because it's really hard to maximize return now.
Yes.
The objective is really capital preservation and reduction of the volatility of the portfolio.
Now, Christina, looking at the current market environment, what we are experiencing right now, what are investors getting wrong or right today? Not months from now, but today.
Well, markets are very volatile, so investors are distracted. The foreign investors are out of the market. They're selling the Philippines, selling actually the entire Asia and even Europe. They're into Wall Street, they're into Taiwan, that have these themes about defense spending, energy assets, the hydrocarbon exporters, and then the AI. So they're all into it. So the emerging market has been marginalized, and even our currencies has been hit. PISE is the worst performer now in ASEAN. It's negative 10% lower. It's good that we're able to recover now. And then the currency also is negative 5% from the day that this war started. So I think this is the time to really focus on what the future will be, what the forecasters are saying, which is for instance the IMF is saying that we will have recovery for 2027 because this war is not gonna last forever. It's time to look beyond the current
Yes.
situation and invest for 2027. And the IMF is saying we're gonna grow 5.8%. We're gonna be based on a survey of various foreign institutions, financial institutions, we're going to be the second best performing GDP next year, next to Vietnam. But this year, we're going to be growing 4%, 4.5%. That's the consensus estimate. Still, we're on the growth path. It may be slow. There could be job losses, but we're in the growth path. We're not having recession. We're not having stagflation, but we're seeing slow expansion. And I think the important thing for government is to support that expansion going into
Christina,
2027.
Yeah. But having said that, how much control do we actually realistically still have over our economic direction? Or are we just mostly reacting to global forces, what we're saying that those are the things that are out of our control?
Well, we have very much in control of our public finance. We may be at the mercy of our external accounts, this current account, the trade, and all of these OFW remittances. We may be at the mercy of the Middle East and all of these high oil prices. But when it comes to the fiscal position, our debt level, our tax revenues, our deficit, which is what the credit rating agencies are watching over and on which depends our credit rating outlook. Yeah. This is where we must do a lot of work and do our homework. And I think government has turned very conservative now. This is one reason they want to really become fiscally responsible at this time that when there is high temptation to really give ayuda left and right. And all of these subsidies to the transport sector. Because the public debt is already rising. We are already at the 18 trillion level and we're gonna end the year at 19 trillion pesos. And that suggests that our GDP, debt to GDP, is going to be approaching like 64%, 65%. That's not going to be to the liking of the credit rating agencies. That's why the government is very conservative. They have kept the VAT for oil and then the excise tax for oil. There is no suspension because it's generating about 500 billion worth of taxes. So if we're gonna squander that,
but like you
then
said,
we're gonna
Christina,
suffer
most
from
of
the
this will
credit
go.
rating.
Yeah, most of this will go to subsidies. What else can we do to make it more sustainable and not just have all this money brought out to subsidies? How can we make it sustainable and last?
Well, the important thing really is to be efficient in collecting taxes because there are many leakages. And then secondly, we must really fight corruption. That is another source of leakage. We have seen like confidence eroded because of the corruption risk. That is really a big loss to the economy. If we didn't have the flood control scandal last year, we would have grown like maybe 5%.
Yes.
Yeah, 5%. So let's be all vigilant when it comes to corruption, when it comes to all of these subsidies. Be very discriminating and analytical when giving it out. So I think it's really now the public debt, which is the big issue, and the fiscal position, which is now ought to be managed very well. Because this is what will keep the economy growing. And then we should have a long-term plan, really. Long-term plan when it comes to energy security, how taxes can be used to support our energy transition, and how businesses who are involved in renewable energy can be supported also. And all of those that are in agriculture and in food security, the corporations that are in there and the farmers as well.
Well, like you said, collections of taxes are not the problem. It's the leakages that happen along the way. So how can we really, let's say, make it more transparent, more accountable. What is the business sector now in terms of discussions with the government? How can we make it more efficient and more transparent?
Well, you've got to professionalize all of these people working for the government. I'm not saying they're not professional, but we have to level up in terms of the moral code, the governance, the professionalism, the ethics, and then maybe
And
we can have
independence.
somebody. Yes, of course, and independence, commitment to your being a civil servant, being having that public trust. So I think this is also a call for a higher moral ground so that we can finally correct our governance shortcomings and we can transition to a level that is worthy and at the global standards. Because we've seen Japan and South Korea really benefit in terms of higher stock prices, higher market indices, only because they have improved the corporate governance. And this is not even about government, it's about corporate governance. So we've seen our economy slide last year. We will be on our way back once the global investors are able to see a very credible resolution of what we have seen, the scandal last year. And then this year, if they're seeing that we are managing our public debt, our fiscal position responsibly, then that's another plus point. The credit rating agencies may even take back the downgrade in terms of the negative outlook, the one that was just given out by Fitch Rating.
But it's a signal. It just gives us time to make changes. We're given at least a leeway of 12. Was it 12 or 18 months before?
12 months.
Yes. But okay, finally, Christina, what's the uncomfortable truth about the economy right now that most people don't want to admit?
Well, this high oil prices, this war in the Middle East has exposed a lot of our shortcomings in terms of like our GDP has slumped, not because business is not good, but because of governance. That's one. We will have high inflation also because we have not built our own indigenous sources of fuel. We have Malampaya and another Sampaguita natural gas, which is I think twice the reserves of Malampaya, something like 3 trillion cubic feet that we have not developed, and we have not actually. Would you believe, Robert? We have become the biggest importer of pork. We are also the biggest importer of rice. So what has happened to our agriculture?
It used to be the other way around.
Yeah, we should be exporting like Vietnam and Thailand. But there were so many lapses when it comes to our policy and our direction. I think this is really a wake-up call. Has exposed all of our shortcomings, vulnerability. Now we're vulnerable to high inflation, energy shortage. When we have all the resources, we are actually a very resource-rich country.
Hopefully we'll be able to learn a lot of lessons from this and really take to heart what needs to be done in the future, not just looking at lessons and not really acting on it. On that note, Christina, always great to hear your insights, and hopefully, again, everything should ease out hopefully in the next couple of weeks or months, hopefully.
Sure.
Okay, we'll take a short break. This is Business Brief. Aboitiz Power posts a strong first quarter surge with net income up 71% despite pressures from rising fuel costs and the Middle East crisis. The energy arm of Aboitiz Equity Ventures says operations remain stable with fuel cost shocks largely passed through under existing power supply agreements. While the Middle East conflict is putting pressure on Aboitiz, the group says it remains cautiously optimistic. Chesulit returns with the details.
The Middle East crisis is putting pressure on Aboitiz Equity Ventures, but the conglomerate is keeping a cautiously optimistic outlook. The active portfolio manager of the Aboitiz Group says that the rising oil prices have driven up costs across its businesses, particularly in logistics and packaging materials. AEV Chief Financial Officer and Corporate Information Officer Toto Hilado notes that the higher costs may be passed on or absorbed depending on how consumers respond.
If consumer spending weakens, this could affect either margins or sales volume. But this is still an evolving situation and really depends on when the Middle East crisis will be resolved.
Aboitiz Foods has noted that the weaker foreign exchange rates have also slightly increased landed raw material expenses. The company warns that prices could continue to rise toward the end of the year and into 2027 due to higher fertilizer costs and climate risks that may affect crop supply.
We manage these impacts by continuously searching for and taking advantage of operational efficiencies and more disciplined cost management.
Aboitiz Power, the energy arm of AEV, says that operations are stable for now with no disruptions linked to the global conflict. But higher fuel import costs are beginning to put pressure on its baseload plants. Nonetheless, the company adds that the existing power supply agreements allow fuel cost shocks to be passed through rather than absorbed, helping cushion the impact.
Our priority, of course, is to ensure that none of this translates into supply disruption for our customers and for the communities that we serve. Long term, I guess the impact is not as clear. One thing we're watching out for on the power side, obviously, is potential reduction in demand as a result of higher cost.
Aboitiz Power notes that the crisis highlights the need to accelerate the country's shift to renewable energy. Aligned with this, AEV is earmarking 62 billion pesos in capital expenditures to Aboitiz Power to expand its generation portfolio. The power distribution arm says it will prioritize capital discipline, efficient resource management, and effective execution this year, expecting continued growth in its renewable energy and energy storage platforms.
Despite the ongoing geopolitical uncertainty, we remain committed to our core strategic objectives, right, which are sustainable growth, portfolio diversification, delivering long-term value to our customers and stakeholders, all while contributing to the energy reliability and security of the country.
Aboitiz Infracapital, the group's infrastructure investment platform, says it hopes geopolitical tensions would ease, allowing airport revenue growth to continue into the second half of the year. With several projects in the pipeline, the company is preparing for new partnerships, which will further strengthen its capacity to pursue opportunities. Despite headwinds from global uncertainty, the Aboitiz Group continues to bank on long-term growth and resilience across its businesses. Che Sulit, Bilyonaryo News Channel.
Political strategist Lito Banayo blames the government for the delay in the issuance of a red notice against Zaldico by the Interpol. Banayo tells BNC's at the forefront Interpol was used by the government as justification for turning over former President Rodrigo Duterte to the International Criminal Court.
Ginamit kasi natin ang Interpol recklessly. When we made Interpol, we said that we were following Interpol and not the ICC when we surrendered former President Rodrigo Duterte to the Hague, to the ICC. No? So parang if you're in the Interpol, you'd be very careful about this because the arrest of President Duterte was international news. No? It was big all over Europe and all over the world for that matter. Now here comes this another fugitive of Philippine justice called Zaldico. You'd be very careful before you give a red notice.
Banayo also calls on the Senate to probe possible lapses that may have enabled Zaldico to evade apprehension at the Czech Republic. SM Prime Holdings may cut its 2026 capital expenditure by up to 35%. This follows the spillover effect of the conflict in the Middle East, which have weighed on the company's earnings outlook. It has also impacted consumer demand. According to Bilyonaryo.com's source, the company's capex may be reduced to about 65 to 70 billion pesos, down from the original 100 billion pesos. As a result, land acquisitions and new projects may be put on hold as the company focuses on strategic assets, including its massive Manila Bay Reclamation project. Tech billionaire Elon Musk testifies at a high-stakes trial on the future of OpenAI. Musk is suing OpenAI co-founder and chief executive Sam Altman and its president Greg Brockman. He alleges they betrayed him and the public when they transformed the nonprofit into a profit-seeking juggernaut. Musk also claims OpenAI was his idea and provided the initial funding. But Altman's lawyer, Bill Savitt, asserts Musk was the one who wanted OpenAI to become a for-profit business and to lead the company. Musk is seeking $150 billion in damages from OpenAI and Microsoft, one of its largest investors. Akbayan Party List Representative Chel Diokno calls for an explanation on how Zaldico was able to leave the Czech Republic, saying somebody clearly dropped the ball. Diokno tells BNC's On Point that an Interpol red notice against Ko could have been issued more quickly.
Well, I think that in situations like this, the more transparent our government is, the easier it is for them to explain to the people exactly what's happening. We're all left in the dark as it is, and up to now, we're basing it on statements that are coming from up there. But we don't really know for a fact what really is the legal status of Zaldico where he is. Of course, the reports would indicate he's now in France, but paano nga nangyari yun at ano ngayon ang gagawin ng ating pamahalaan?
The lawmaker adds that what happened was really disappointing. Reports now say Ko is under the jurisdiction of French authorities, where he is reportedly seeking political asylum. Asian shares rise after the United Arab Emirates said it would leave OPEC in a move seen as a blow to the powerful oil cartel. Among Asian markets, most indices gained, with the Hang Seng rising the most, up over 1%. The Straits Times, however, slipped. In currency trading, the US dollar mostly strengthened against the major Asian currencies. And in commodities, gold declined while oil prices moved higher. In cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin rose nearly 1%, while Ethereum added more than 1%. Philippine shares end in the positive territory. The PSEI closes 0.7% higher to 59.07. The sectoral indices are mixed, with services rising the most at over 1%. Property falls the most at nearly 0.1%. Advancers outpace decliners 105 to 78, with value turnover at 7.7 billion pesos. The day's most active stocks are mixed, with BDO rising the most at almost 3%. Century Pacific falls the most at over 1%. In currencies, the peso closes at 61.567 against the US dollar from the previous close of 61.30. This is the lowest close in history. Maynilad Water Services net income rises by more than 10% to 4 billion pesos in the first quarter. The company attributed the increase to a growing customer base and a sharp reduction in water losses. Maynilad also said this reflects steady execution across both its operations and investment programs. The statement of assets, liabilities, and net worth is not enough evidence in the Senate impeachment trial of Vice President Sara Duterte. Former COA Commissioner Heidi Mendoza made this statement in an interview with the spokes.
You're looking for probable cause. And ang pinakamababaw na titingnan dito ay yung non-declaration, di ba? Yung hindi mo dineclare. Hindi pa natin mapapag-usapan dito yung sasabihin natin, may ill-gotten wealth ba? We do not have the sufficient evidence to prove that, right? And I don't think that the hearing in the Congress is the process to arrive at. There, I would say. Dito, ang tinitingnan ng natin ay pinaka-basic. Meron bang misdeclaration? Yung meron kang hindi na i-declare.
Lawson Philippines partners with ASEAN to transition its business operations to 100% renewable energy. Under a retail electricity supply agreement, the convenience store chain plans to switch 25 locations across Metro Manila, Laguna, Cavite, and Bulacan to renewable power starting late May. The transition will be facilitated through the government-led retail aggregation program. This is an initiative under the Retail Competition and Open Access System. It allows multiple electricity consumers to aggregate demand and negotiate directly with licensed power suppliers. The U.S. State Department will produce a limited number of commemorative passports featuring the image of U.S. President Donald Trump. The passports will be released as part of the celebration of the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Declaration of Independence in July. It is the latest example of the administration attaching the president's likeness or name to official government property. And that's a wrap for today's Business Brief. I'm Robert Tan. Join us again tomorrow for the stories that help you plan your next big, bold business move. Only here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo News Channel.